Before we dive into one of the most revolutionary technological advantages of World War II, hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the United States, Europe, Asia, or somewhere else entirely? We love hearing from our global audience. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Private George Elliott stares at the largest radar blip he's ever seen on his SCR-270 oscilloscope screen. The signal shows dozens of aircraft approaching from the north, 136 miles out. He calls it in immediately. The response from Lieutenant Kermit Tyler will haunt American military history. Don't worry about it. 55 minutes later, 183 Japanese aircraft rained destruction on the Pacific Fleet. But that catastrophic failure contained the seed of America's revenge. That radar, dismissed, misunderstood, and tragically ignored, would evolve into the most terrifying weapon Japanese pilots would ever face. Within 3 years, American aircraft would hunt in total darkness with electronic eyes, killing enemies before they could even be seen. This is the story of how radar technology transformed World War II aerial combat and gave American forces an overwhelming advantage in the Pacific theater. What you're about to discover isn't just about machines and radio waves, it's about the human cost of technological superiority and inferiority. By 1943, Japan faced a critical problem. American air superiority during daylight hours had become absolute. The skies belonged to formations of Hellcats, Corsairs, and Wildcats that devastated Japanese aircraft with kill ratios reaching 19-1. Desperate to maintain offensive capability, Japan shifted to night bombing raids, lone aircraft or small formations that would strike American bases, ships, and installations under cover of darkness. These washing machine Charlie raids were designed to deny Americans sleep, damage morale, and inflict casualties without risking daylight massacres. For months, this strategy worked. Japanese pilots could approach unseen, strike their targets, and escape back into the protective embrace of night. American defenders were nearly helpless. Visual spotting in darkness was impossible beyond a few hundred yards. Anti-aircraft fire was wildly inaccurate without targets to track. Night-capable fighters were almost non-existent, and those that did attempt interceptions were flying blind, relying on luck and moonlight to find their prey. The stakes were enormous. Every successful night raid damaged critical infrastructure, killed personnel, and demonstrated American vulnerability. The psychological impact was devastating. Exhausted troops unable to sleep, constant anxiety, and the growing realization that while America owned the day, Japan still commanded the night. Something had to change. And it did, thanks to a revolution happening in laboratories, test facilities, and desperate innovation on both sides of the Atlantic. The story of airborne radar begins not in America, but in Great Britain, in the dark days of 1940. London was burning. Night after night, German Luftwaffe bombers crossed the English Channel under cover of darkness, raining destruction on British cities. Prime Minister Winston Churchill faced a terrifying reality. His fighter force, so effective during daylight battles, was nearly useless at night. British scientists, led by Robert Watson Watt, had already developed ground-based radar stations called Chain Home that could detect approaching aircraft up to 160 kilometers away. These installations had proven invaluable during the Battle of Britain, giving RAF fighters precious minutes to scramble and intercept German raiders. But detecting aircraft and shooting them down were two entirely different challenges. The problem was simple but seemingly insurmountable. How do you fit radar equipment small enough and light enough to install in a single-engine fighter, yet powerful enough to detect enemy bombers in total darkness? Early experiments proved frustrating. The equipment was massive, hundreds of pounds of vacuum tubes, power supplies, antennas, and display screens. The technology consumed enormous amounts of electrical power and generated heat that could cook a pilot alive in a cramped cockpit. British engineer Edward Bowen led a desperate effort to miniaturize airborne interception radar. Working with limited resources and constant German bombing raids threatening his laboratory, Bowen and his team developed the AI Mark IV radar system in 1940. This breakthrough used meter-wavelength radio waves and could detect bomber-sized targets at approximately 4 miles, just barely enough for a skilled pilot to close the distance and engage. The AI Mark IV was installed in Bristol Beaufighters and de Havilland Mosquitoes, twin-engine aircraft with room for both a pilot and a dedicated radar operator. These night fighters began scoring kills against German bombers in late 1940, but the technology remained temperamental, difficult to operate, and required extensive specialized training. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American military leaders watched Britain struggle with intense interest. The United States Army Signal Corps had been developing its own radar systems since the mid-1930s, focusing primarily on ground-based early warning equipment. The SCR-270 and SCR-271 systems could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles, but they were enormous installations requiring multiple trucks for transport and operation. American military planners recognized that war with Japan was increasingly likely. The vast distances of the Pacific Ocean presented unique challenges. Aircraft carriers would be the decisive weapon in any conflict, and those carriers needed fighters capable of defending the fleet around the clock. If the Japanese Navy could coordinate night attacks against American task forces, the results would be catastrophic. Carriers were extraordinarily vulnerable to nighttime torpedo bombers. A single successful strike could sink a multi-million-dollar warship and kill thousands of sailors. In September 1940, a historic meeting changed everything. The Tizard mission brought a delegation of British scientists to America, carrying with them the most closely guarded military secrets of the war. Among these was the cavity magnetron, a revolutionary device that enabled microwave radar operating at centimeter wavelengths. This technology represented a quantum leap forward, allowing radar systems to be dramatically smaller, more powerful, and more accurate than anything previously possible. American scientists and engineers, particularly those at MIT's Radiation Laboratory, immediately recognized the magnetron's potential. Here was the breakthrough needed to create practical airborne radar for single-seat fighters. Development began immediately, but precious time was ticking away. Japanese military planners were already preparing their strategy for Pacific conquest, and American forces remained vulnerable, lacking the technology to defend themselves in darkness. The stage was set for a technological race that would determine the fate of nations and the lives of tens of thousands of young men on both sides of the world's largest ocean. On the night of December 30th, 1943, a lone Japanese Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber approached Munda Airfield on New Georgia Island in the Solomon Islands chain. The pilot was experienced, his aircraft loaded with bombs targeting American installations below. The crew felt confident. Under the cover of darkness, they had successfully conducted dozens of similar raids, dropping their ordnance and escaping before American defenders could react. Night belonged to Japan. What the Japanese crew didn't know was that 6 specially modified Vought F-4U-2 Corsairs equipped with experimental and /APS-4 radar pods were orbiting nearby, invisible in the darkness. Lieutenant Commander William Widhelm, leading VF-N-75, received vectors from ground controllers and positioned his night fighter behind the unsuspecting Betty. His radar operator called out ranges as they closed: 4 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles. At 1,500 feet, Widhelm opened fire with his 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Betty exploded in a brilliant fireball that briefly illuminated the night sky before plunging into the ocean. The crew never knew what hit them. This engagement represented everything Japanese military planners feared. 4 months before this moment, Japan had enjoyed nearly complete freedom of operation during nighttime hours. The mathematics of night fighting without radar were brutally simple and heavily favored the attacker. A human eye, even under perfect conditions with a full moon, could spot another aircraft at perhaps 1,000 yards maximum, usually far less. By the time an American pilot visually acquired a Japanese radar, the geometry of aerial combat meant interception was nearly impossible. Consider the challenge. A Japanese bomber approaches at 180 miles per hour. An American fighter must not only spot the bomber in three-dimensional darkness but must also calculate its altitude, heading, and speed, then maneuver into an attack position, all while flying his own aircraft on instruments in total darkness with no visual references. The bomber, meanwhile, could simply change altitude or heading and vanish into the night. American defenders reported mission after mission where they never saw the enemy despite hours of patrolling. The psychological toll was enormous. Sailors aboard ships anchored in forward bases dreaded nightfall. They knew Japanese raiders would come, they just didn't know when or where. Air raid sirens would sound, men would scramble to battle stations, anti-aircraft gunners would fire blindly at engine sounds, and explosions would rip through installations and vessels. Then silence. The attackers would be gone, and Americans would count their dead and wounded in the darkness. Captain Joseph Foss, a Marine Corps fighter ace with 26 confirmed kills, described the frustration in his combat diary. During daylight, we owned the sky. We could see them coming from miles away and usually shot them down before they reached the targets. But at night, we were helpless. The Japs would fly right over us, and we couldn't do a damn thing about it. We tried launching patrols, but it was like trying to find a black cat in a coal cellar. Statistical analysis from late 1943 painted a grim picture. Japanese night raids in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea sectors were achieving mission success rates above 70%. American night fighters without radar achieved intercepts on less than 5% of attempted missions. Even when interceptions occurred, the kill rate was below 20% because pilots lost visual contact before maneuvering into firing position. The problem extended far beyond individual bases. As American forces island-hopped across the Pacific, capturing Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and pushing toward the Marianas, each newly captured airfield became a target for Japanese night raiders. Every American advance created new defensive requirements that couldn't be met with available technology. The Japanese understood this perfectly and exploited American weakness ruthlessly. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's leading aces, later wrote about their night operations. "We knew the Americans were nearly blind at night. We could approach with confidence, knowing their radar was primitive and their fighters couldn't find us. The darkness was our ally. We would come in low over the water to avoid radar detection, strike quickly, and disappear before their defenses could respond. It was very effective. But Japan's night advantage contained a hidden vulnerability. Japanese military leadership, despite possessing brilliant radar scientists and engineers, had failed to prioritize radar development or integrate it effectively into their operational doctrine. Cultural factors played a role. There was institutional resistance to relying on technology over pilot skill and fighting spirit. Inter-service rivalry between the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy meant radar research was duplicated inefficiently. Most critically, Japan's radar development program received only a fraction of the resources allocated to aircraft and ship production. The Japanese Navy's misguided policy regarding radio emissions compounded the problem. Fearing that using radar would reveal ship positions to the enemy, Japanese commanders ordered radar systems turned off during combat operations until 1944. This self-imposed handicap meant that even when Japanese vessels possessed radar capability, they operated blind by choice. It was a decision that would cost them dearly. American forces needed a solution urgently. The technology existed. British researchers had proven that. But could American industry and ingenuity adapt, improve, and mass-produce radar systems fast enough to turn the tide before casualties became unsustainable? In a nondescript laboratory at MIT's Radiation Laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a team of physicists and engineers worked around the clock on a device that would transform aerial warfare. Their goal seemed impossible: create an airborne radar system small enough to fit in a fighter plane, reliable enough to work in combat conditions, and simple enough for a single pilot to operate while simultaneously flying his aircraft and engaging enemy targets. The breakthrough came from combining British cavity magnetron technology with American mass-production expertise. The cavity magnetron, a device roughly the size of a grapefruit, could generate powerful microwave pulses at 10-centimeter wavelengths. This frequency offered enormous advantages over earlier meter wavelength systems: smaller antennas, better target discrimination, and dramatically improved accuracy. Dr. Luis Alvarez, a physicist who would later win the Nobel Prize, led the effort to develop what became the APS-4 airborne radar system. The team faced countless challenges. Vacuum tubes failed under the vibration and G-forces of aerial combat. Power supplies overheated. Display screens were unreadable in bright sunlight. Every problem required innovative solutions developed under intense time pressure as casualty reports from the Pacific arrived daily. The APS-4 was revolutionary in its simplicity. Weighing just 180 pounds, it consisted of a small radar antenna housed in a streamlined pod that could be mounted under the wing or fuselage of a fighter aircraft. The system operated at 3,000 MHz with a beam width of 6 degrees, giving it a maximum detection range of approximately 4 miles against a bomber-sized target, just enough for an experienced pilot to close and engage. The cockpit display was elegantly simple: a small oscilloscope showing range and bearing information as a glowing dot. In search mode, the radar swept a 150-degree arc ahead of the aircraft, displaying any contacts as bright spots on the screen. When the pilot detected a target, He could switch to intercept mode, which provided precise steering commands to close the distance. The dot moved up for targets above, down for targets below, left and right for azimuth corrections. A skilled pilot could fly by radar alone, following the electronic guidance straight to his prey. But the real genius lay not in the hardware but in the operational procedures developed to employ this new capability. The U.S. Navy created specialized night fighter squadrons and developed training programs that lasted 29 weeks, far longer than standard fighter pilot training. Pilots learned to fly entirely on instruments, interpret radar returns, manage interceptions in three-dimensional darkness, and maintain situational awareness while processing information from multiple sources simultaneously. Ground-controlled interception procedures were refined to maximize radar effectiveness. Large search radars on ships or land bases would detect incoming Japanese raids at 60 to 100 miles range. Controllers would vector night fighters toward the threat, positioning them within radar range of the enemy. Once the fighter's onboard radar acquired the target, the pilot took over, conducting the final approach and attack autonomously. Lieutenant Russell Reiserer, flying from the carrier USS Hornet with VF-N-76 in 1944, described the experience. The radar scope was like having cat eyes. I could see targets that were completely invisible. The scope showed a dot indicating range and bearing. I'd follow that dot, closing the distance while keeping my eyes scanning outside for visual contact. At about 1,000 feet, I'd usually spot their exhaust flames, two little orange glows in the darkness. That's when I knew I had them. I'd maneuver behind and below, line up my gun sight, and open fire. Most of them never knew I was there until the bullets hit. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat became the primary platform for the AN/APS-4 radar system, designated F-6F-3E and later F-6F-5N. These night fighters retained the Hellcat's standard armament of 6.50 caliber machine guns, giving them devastating firepower once within range. Some variants were equipped with two 20mm cannons and 4.50 caliber guns for even greater hitting power. The Hellcat's excellent low-speed handling characteristics, good pilot visibility, and stable gun platform made it ideal for the precise maneuvering required during night interceptions. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow represented the ultimate expression of American night fighter technology, the world's first aircraft designed from inception specifically for radar-equipped night combat. Larger than the Hellcat, the P-61 was a twin-engine, twin-boom monster armed with four 20mm cannons and equipped with a more advanced SCR-720 radar system. The Black Widow could detect targets at ranges up to 5 miles and had a dedicated radar operator sitting behind the pilot to manage the intercept while the pilot focused on flying. First Lieutenant Dale Haberman and his radar operator Lieutenant Ray Mooney scored the first P-61 kill in the Pacific on June 30, 1944, flying their aircraft named Moon Happy over Saipan. The intercom recordings of that engagement, transmitted back to base, reveal the cold precision of radar-guided combat. Mooney, contact bearing 350, range 8 miles, altitude 17,000. Haberman, Roger, turning to intercept. Mooney, target climbing. 2 contacts now, bomber with fighter escort. Range 6 miles. Haberman, can you separate them? Mooney, negative, they're too close. Wait. Fighter braking right. Stay on the bomber. Mooney, range 3,000 feet. You should have visual. Haberman, negative visual. Wait, I see exhaust. Betty, 17,000 feet. Mooney, range 1,000 feet. Fire. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes from initial radar contact to kill. The Japanese bomber crew never transmitted a warning, never took evasive action, and almost certainly never saw their attacker. The fighter escort tried to engage after seeing the explosion but couldn't locate Moon Happy in the darkness. Haberman and Mooney returned safely to base. Production ramped up rapidly. By mid-1944, the United States was producing approximately 200 radar-equipped night fighters per month. 3 specialized squadrons, VF-N-76, VF-N-77, and VF-N-78, deployed across the Pacific with detachments aboard fleet carriers and at forward land bases. The 6th, 418th, 548th, and 549th Night Fighter Squadrons operated P-61 Black Widows from captured island airfields, creating an ever-tightening net around Japanese forces. The Japanese were completely unprepared for this technological leap. Their own radar development lagged years behind, and they had no effective countermeasures. Japanese pilots reported seeing American fighters seemingly materialize from nowhere in pitch darkness, attacking with devastating accuracy. Some Japanese aviators believed Americans had developed cat-like night vision abilities through special diets or surgery. Others thought Americans were using infrared searchlights invisible to Japanese eyes. The truth, advanced microwave radar, was beyond most Japanese pilots' understanding. Captain Saburo Sakai's confidence about Japanese night superiority evaporated after encounters with radar-equipped American fighters. In his post-war memoir, he wrote, "By 1944, night flying became suicide. We would approach targets carefully, watching for searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. Then, without warning, an American fighter would be on our tail, guns blazing. We never saw them coming. We never heard their engines. They were ghosts, invisible killers that hunted in darkness. Many of our best night pilots simply disappeared. We found wreckage the next morning, but no explanation for what happened." The technological advantage was decisive and complete. American forces had transformed night from Japan's sanctuary into their killing ground. The results were immediate and devastating for Japanese forces. Statistical analysis of night combat operations shows the dramatic transformation that radar technology created. In the 6 months before radar-equipped night fighters deployed extensively, July through December 1943, Japanese night raids in the Central Pacific achieved success rates above 65%, with American defensive intercepts succeeding only 5% of the time. By mid-1944, those numbers had reversed catastrophically for Japan. American night fighters achieved intercept rates above 40%, and when intercepts occurred, kill rates exceeded 80%. The Battle of Saipan in June 1944 provided the first large-scale test of American night fighter capabilities. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron arrived on Saipan just 9 days after the initial Marine landings, bringing their new P-61 Black Widows into combat. Japanese bombers had been conducting nightly raids against American positions, inflicting casualties and disrupting operations. The first P-61 combat kill occurred on June 30th when Lieutenant Haberman's crew destroyed a G-4M Betty bomber. But tragedy struck first. On the night of June 25th to 26th, 2 P-61s collided during landing operations, killing both crews and destroying 2 precious aircraft. The squadron commander later wrote, "We learned immediately that night operations demanded perfect discipline and procedures. The darkness that protected us from enemy fighters also made us vulnerable to our own mistakes." Despite early losses, the P-61s quickly demonstrated their value. Working in coordination with new SCR-527 early warning radars and N/TPS, 10 height-finding radars, American controllers could detect Japanese raids at 140 miles and vector night fighters to intercept them well before they reached targets. Japanese pilots adapted by dropping radar-confusing chaff, but the microwave radars used by American forces were largely unaffected by these countermeasures designed to fool older metric wavelength systems. The psychological impact on Japanese aircrews was profound. Night raids that had once been routine became terrifyingly dangerous. Japanese bomber crews began experiencing the same fear and helplessness that American defenders had felt just months earlier. Mission success rates plummeted while losses mounted steadily. By January 1945, Japanese night raids against Saipan essentially ceased. The losses had become unsustainable. Lieutenant Russell Reiser's detachment aboard USS Hornet became legendary for their effectiveness. Flying F-6F-5N Hellcats equipped with N/APS-6 radar, Reiser's team accounted for 25 confirmed kills between April and September 1944, more than half of all F-6F night fighter kills during that period. In one spectacular offensive mission in July 1944, Reiser's team intercepted a formation of 7 Japanese bombers approaching the fleet at night. Working in pairs, the American night fighters systematically destroyed 4 bombers and damaged 2 others in a running battle that lasted less than 30 minutes. The surviving Japanese aircraft jettisoned their bombs and fled. The Navy's night fighter operations expanded dramatically throughout 1944 and 1945. The light carrier USS Independence was designated as the first specialized night carrier, operating exclusively with night fighters and conducting around-the-clock defensive patrols separate from the main fleet. This innovation allowed the night fighters to launch and recover without interfering with daytime operations while extending defensive coverage to 24 hours. Destroyer pickets stationed 50 miles from the main fleet body became mini-control stations, each vectoring 2 night fighters to intercept approaching threats. This layered defense system created multiple opportunities to destroy Japanese aircraft before they could threaten high-value targets. Admiral William Halsey later wrote in his Okinawa Action Report, "Night fighter detachments on day carriers achieved remarkable success. Most kills were due to excellent night controlling, rigid force control of fighters airborne, and outstanding maintenance." The numbers tell a compelling story. Between March 18 and May 25, 1945, during the Okinawa campaign, Task Force 58 night fighters shot down 91 Japanese aircraft. American night fighter squadrons in the Pacific achieved a combined kill total exceeding 300 aircraft by war's end, with remarkably low losses to enemy action. Several squadrons completed entire combat tours without losing a single aircraft to Japanese fighters or ground fire. The impact extended beyond simple kill statistics. Japanese commanders were forced to abandon night offensive operations in many sectors, ceding control of darkness to American forces. This tactical shift had strategic consequences. Airfields that would have required constant nocturnal vigilance could now operate with reduced defensive postures, allowing personnel to rest and maintenance crews to work without interruption. Supply convoys could move at night without fear of air attack. American submarines could surface under cover of darkness to recharge batteries, knowing Japanese air patrols had been neutralized. The strain on Japanese aircrew morale became severe. Pilot quality had already declined precipitously by 1944 as experienced aviators were killed and replaced with hastily trained recruits averaging only 100 hours flight time, compared to American pilots with 300-plus hours. Night operations, once a relatively safe way to gain experience, became death traps for inexperienced Japanese pilots facing radar-equipped American hunters. One Japanese pilot who survived the war, interviewed by American intelligence officers in 1946, described the terror. "We called the American night fighters electromagnetic demons. We believed they could see through darkness as if it were daylight. Our intelligence officers told us Americans were using secret rays or special crystals. We had no defense. If you were detected, you were dead. The only hope was to fly very low over the water and pray their radar couldn't pick you up from the sea clutter. Even that usually failed." The technological advantage extended to the final days of the war. On the night of August 14 to 15, 1945, hours after Japan's surrender announcement, P-61, Lady in the Dark, encountered a Japanese Ki-44 fighter that apparently hadn't received word that hostilities had ended. The Japanese pilot spotted the P-61 and dove to wave top level, executing desperate evasive maneuvers to escape. He flew so aggressively that his aircraft struck the water and exploded. No shots were fired, yet the engagement represented the final air-to-air victory of World War II, occurring nearly 24 hours after official cessation of hostilities. The next night, Lady in the Dark encountered another Japanese aircraft, this time a Ki-43 fighter on what may have been a final kamikaze mission. A wild dogfight ensued at low altitude, with the P-61 crew repeatedly losing and reacquiring their target on radar. Eventually, the Japanese fighter vanished from radar. Ground troops found the wreckage the next morning, crashed into jungle terrain, pilot dead. These final engagements demonstrated the complete reversal of fortune that radar technology had created. Just 3 years earlier, American forces were helpless against night attacks. Now, Japanese aircraft couldn't survive even a few hours past surrender because American technological superiority was so overwhelming. The impact of radar-equipped night fighters fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory. By neutralizing Japanese night offensive capability, American forces achieved complete air supremacy, not just during daylight hours but around the clock. This advantage accelerated the island-hopping campaign, reduced casualties among ground forces and naval personnel, and contributed significantly to Japan's growing realization that continued resistance was futile. The story of radar-equipped night fighters in the Pacific War teaches profound lessons about technology, innovation, and the nature of warfare that remain startlingly relevant today. The technology that gave America complete air supremacy didn't spring from nowhere. It emerged from a combination of British desperation, American industrial capacity, brilliant scientists willing to work themselves to exhaustion, and military leaders courageous enough to bet scarce resources on unproven technology. The contrast between American and Japanese approaches to radar development reveals fundamental differences in how nations mobilize for total war. The United States invested billions of dollars in radar research and production, recognizing that technological superiority could save American lives and shorten the war. The MIT Radiation Laboratory alone employed over 4,000 scientists and engineers working on radar projects. American industry produced approximately 100,000 radar systems of all types during the war, an industrial achievement that reflected national commitment to technological warfare. Japan's approach was fragmented and under-resourced. Despite having brilliant scientists like Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi, who invented the directional antenna bearing his name, Japan failed to mobilize and focus its technical resources effectively. Inter-service rivalry meant Army and Navy radar programs duplicated effort without sharing information. Cultural resistance to relying on technology over fighting spirit limited institutional support. Most critically, Japanese leadership failed to recognize until too late that modern warfare demanded technological innovation as much as traditional military virtues. The human dimension of this technological race deserves emphasis. Every successful night fighter interception represented not just a technical achievement but a human triumph. Pilots who mastered incredibly complex skills, radar operators who interpreted glowing dots on screens with life-or-death accuracy, maintenance crews who kept temperamental equipment functioning in tropical heat and humidity, and controllers who vectored fighters through three-dimensional darkness with calm professionalism. Lieutenant Commander William Widhelm, who led the first successful radar-equipped night fighter squadron at Munda, later reflected, "The radar was crucial, absolutely. But it was just a tool. What won those engagements was training, discipline, and teamwork. We spent months learning to interpret those radar scopes, practicing intercepts until we could fly the procedures in our sleep. When the moment came in combat, all that training took over. The radar told us where to look, but we still had to execute perfectly under extreme pressure." The innovation extended beyond hardware to encompass entirely new operational doctrines. Ground-controlled interception procedures developed during the Battle of Britain were adapted and refined for Pacific operations. The concept of dedicated night fighter squadrons with specialized training became standard. The integration of radar data from multiple sources, ship-based search radars, ground stations, and airborne intercept radars, created an information network that gave American forces unprecedented situational awareness. Modern military forces owe enormous debts to the night fighter pioneers of World War II. Every fighter aircraft today carries descendants of those primitive and /APS-4 radars, sophisticated systems capable of tracking dozens of targets simultaneously at hundreds of miles range. The F-35 Lightning II and /APG-81 AESA radar represents the direct lineage of technology first deployed in 1943, refined through 8 decades of continuous development. The lesson about technological advantage remains urgently relevant. In any conflict, the side that sees farther, detects enemies earlier, and processes information faster possesses decisive advantages. Today's competitions involve stealth technology, electronic warfare, cyber capabilities, and artificial intelligence, but the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Technological superiority saves lives and wins wars. The courage required of those early night fighter crews deserves special recognition. Flying in pitch darkness with primitive instruments, hunting skilled enemies who would kill you instantly if given the chance, requires extraordinary nerve. These men flew missions knowing their radar could fail, their engine could quit, or they could become disoriented and crash into the ocean. Yet they launched night after night because the mission demanded it. Captain Lee Kendall, pilot of Lady in the Dark, later wrote about the experience, "People ask if I was scared. Of course I was scared. Every mission was terrifying. You're flying at night over water with no visual references except your instruments. Your radar screen is the only thing telling you where the enemy is, and you have to trust it completely. Then you close in to gun range, hoping they don't see you first and put a burst through your cockpit." The adrenaline was intense, but we believed in the mission. Every Japanese bomber we shot down meant American lives saved on the ground. The Japanese perspective provides equally important lessons. Japan's failure to prioritize radar development and integrate it effectively into operations stemmed partly from institutional culture that valued traditional military virtues over technological innovation. This blind spot proved catastrophic. By 1944, Japanese pilots, brave, skilled, and dedicated, found themselves completely outmatched not because they lacked courage but because they lacked the tools to compete. Former Japanese Navy pilot Saburo Sakai's post-war reflections capture this tragedy. "We were sent into darkness to fight enemies we couldn't see, using equipment that didn't work, following doctrines that were obsolete. Our leaders understood too late that modern war is won by the nation with superior technology and industry. Individual courage means nothing when your opponent can kill you before you know they're there." This was a painful lesson written in the blood of thousands of young pilots. The development of night fighter tactics created templates still used today. The concept of using long-range sensors, radar, to detect threats, then vectoring specialized assets, fighters, to intercept them, underlies modern air defense systems worldwide. AWACS aircraft, ground-based air defense radars, and carrier battlegroup defenses all employ variations of procedures first developed during World War II night fighting. The remarkable success of radar-equipped night fighters demonstrated that wars are won as much in laboratories and factories as on battlefields. The Manhattan Project often receives credit as the decisive scientific achievement of World War II, but radar technology impacted daily combat operations far more directly. Every night Japanese raiders were destroyed, every convoy protected, every airfield defended. These tactical successes accumulated into strategic advantage that helped win the Pacific War. For modern audiences, this story offers insights into how innovation happens under pressure. The AN/APS-4 radar system went from concept to operational deployment in less than 18 months, a pace that seems impossible given today's lengthy development cycles. This speed was achieved through brutal focus, elimination of bureaucratic obstacles, direct communication between scientists and combat forces, and willingness to accept some technical imperfection in exchange for rapid fielding. Dr. Luis Alvarez later wrote, "We knew the equipment wasn't perfect. Vacuum tubes failed, displays were hard to read, weather caused false returns. But perfect was the enemy of good enough. American pilots needed radar immediately, not eventually. We delivered a system that worked well enough to kill enemy aircraft at night. We could refine and improve in later versions. Getting something into combat quickly saved more lives than spending years pursuing perfection." This philosophy of rapid iteration and continuous improvement became foundational to American military technology development. The same approach that created the AN/APS-4 radar also produced proximity-fused artillery shells, improved sonar systems, enhanced code-breaking machines, and countless other innovations that gave Allied forces critical advantages. The story of radar-equipped night fighters exemplifies American ingenuity, determination, and willingness to embrace innovation. From Pearl Harbor's ignored radar warning to complete air supremacy by 1945, the trajectory demonstrates what can be achieved when brilliant minds, adequate resources, and clear purpose align. Today, as new technologies emerge, artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, quantum computing, directed energy systems, the lessons from 1943 remain relevant. Nations that effectively integrate emerging technologies into military doctrine will possess decisive advantages. Those that fail to adapt risk finding themselves in Japan's position, brave warriors with obsolete equipment facing enemies they cannot defeat. Before we close, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Drop a comment below telling us what you think of this story. Did you know about radar-equipped night fighters? Do you have family members who served in the Pacific? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. The invisible killers that terrorized Japanese pilots represent more than military history. They demonstrate humanity's capacity for innovation under pressure, the decisive importance of technological superiority, and the courage of individuals who master complex systems to defend their comrades. The next time you see a military aircraft, remember that inside its sleek exterior sits technology descended directly from those primitive radar scopes that first turned night into day in the skies over the Pacific Ocean. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember that history's greatest advantages often come not from superior numbers or firepower, but from seeing what others cannot see, knowing what others don't know, and adapting faster than your adversary can respond. That lesson remains true whether you're fighting a world war or competing in business, science, or life. The ghost planes that haunted Japanese nightmares weren't supernatural, they were American ingenuity made real, one radar scope at a time.